Hello there. My name is Karim Laddock, and I am located in Toronto. He, him pronouns. I currently sit on the board of the Dignity Network Canada, and I'm serving in the role of a co-chair. Welcome to everyone. This panel is particularly important to me at a personal level and other reasons as well, which I will get into briefly. One is because I am Indian in origin, and I keep saying to people, I was not made in India, but I'm 100% made of India, right? So you can't take India out of me. And so this is of personal relevance to me. I deeply care about what goes on in South Asia, in India particularly. On a more objective basis, what I would say is India is actually more than 1/7 of the world's population, right? Give or take. And so it's a very significant, portion of our community globally. So I'm excited that this discussion is happening. The social reason that I'm excited about is whatever happens in India actually does impact the discussions in the dining rooms of people in the diaspora. And I suspect there are hundreds of millions like me who sit outside, whose views are actually very influenced by what happens, quote unquote, back home. And the political reason is India is such a precedent setter, widely respected across the world as a country, and for its culture as well. So when India leads the way, like with 377, we have no idea what ripple effect that has on other Commonwealth countries as well as other countries. So this to me is a significant discussion. I am sure it will be very lively, very informative, and Barry has allowed me to stay on. So I will go on mute and cut off my video, and I will stay on and listen passionately to what all of you have to say. Thank you. Over to you, Pranay.
Thank you so much, Karim. That was a beautiful introduction to the discussion we're about to have today. Hello, everyone. My name is Pranay Anand. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm currently the Executive Director at the Alliance for South Asian AIDS Prevention, or ASAAP for short. ASAAP started about 30 years ago in Toronto when a South Asian couple was trying to access information about HIV and sexual health. And we realized that getting information in a culturally relevant manner and in languages that people can consume more easily is more important. We've had a pretty extensive history over the last 3 decades, and more recently we've started working with Middle Eastern and Indo-Caribbean populations as well. And currently we offer services, navigation care services for those living with HIV, education services for specifically South Asian, Middle Eastern, and Indo-Caribbean queer folks, and also settlement services for newcomers from South Asian and Middle East, South Asian countries and the Middle East. With that, I'm really excited about this discussion today. There's several familiar faces people I've worked really closely with in the past, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion we're about to have. I believe everyone will get a chance to introduce themselves, but I will let Deepak Kashyap, my good friend and colleague, take over. And Deepak, please.
Thank you, everyone, and I welcome all of you present here and all of you listening. Thank you very much for taking time and joining us. I recognize that many of us are situated, especially here in Canada, we're situated on Indigenous lands. I am situated in Winnipeg. Some of the people are joining me from Toronto. And it's very important for us to recognize that even as some people who are immigrants and have chosen to come to this country, we're still the beneficiaries of the lands and water of the Indigenous people. So I recognize that I'm in Winnipeg, which is on Treaty 1 land, and it's the land and home of Métis people, amongst many other tribes in Canada. So I thank you all for being present here, and Dignity. I also like to thank Dignity Network, Fiesta Canada Pride, ASAAP, and of course, Pride Winnipeg as part of this Pride Winnipeg Festival. Also, a big thank you to our supporters and sponsors which is CUPE, Canada's largest national public service employee union with over 700,000 members. 700,000, my God, that's a lot. CUPE has generously providing financial support for this event, and we are all grateful for them, as well as ongoing support for human rights and the LGBTQI2S+ communities across the country. This session is also part of the series of virtual panels happening across Canada this summer, supported by CUPE and organized by Dignity Network Canada and FCP, designed to connect the local and the global. Our topic for today is LGBTIQ human rights in India, and the topic was chosen by Pride Winnipeg, and we are pleased to bring this to you today. Now, before we go ahead with the topic anywhere, I would like to mention two things. Every time we're talking about human rights, we end up committing these two very easy mistakes. We either end up comparing apples to oranges, where we take one country, which is completely different in history, geography, culture, politics, and compare it to another country, which is not that. So this discussion is not going to be about comparing India to Canada or Canada to Switzerland or Switzerland to Netherlands. It's not that. It's not country comparison. This discussion is going to be mostly around comparing India to itself, to the ideals that India has committed itself to, at least in letter, and a lot of the times in practice as well. We are facing situations in India which are worrying for us. For example, what's happening with LGBTQ people in India, what's happening to Muslims in India, what's happening to, and interestingly, everyone in India who is suffering has to now defend themselves. For example, it shouldn't be up to Muslim people to come and educate us. It shouldn't be up to the LGBTQ people to go and educate others, to just live with dignity, to just live with the human rights that we have. But here we are. And so we'll be talking about that. The second easy mistake that we can make is sometimes, and I used to make this mistake all the time, where my misplaced patriotism could mean that every time human rights were being discussed in the context of India, I would always go and, do whataboutism, but what about that? And what about that in that country? And deflect almost all questions, because I would feel shame, I would feel ignorance, or I would be in complete denial. So I think what we're trying to avoid is these two mistakes of comparing apples to oranges and feeling personally attacked by discussing situations that are very real for a lot of people in the country. Our goal today is to bring together 4 awesome activists from India who will speak of their own experiences and the ideas around the issues impacting the rights of LGBTIQ people in India. So I'm going to start with the introductions. I am so glad to introduce Manvendra Singh Gohil, the Crown Prince of Rajpipla, an erstwhile state of Gujarat and the 39th district descendant of the 650-year-old Gohil dynasty. He is the first member of the royal family to openly come out as gay to the world. I think it's almost in Asia now. I don't think you're still the only, but I think you were amongst the first few ones to come out as gay and a royal. He's the first member of the royal family to come out openly. He's the only Indian to be interviewed by Oprah Winfrey 3 times and has been featured on the show Keeping Up with the Kardashians. He is the chairperson and co-founder of Lakshya Trust, which is dedicated to empowering LGBTQ community in India. He is also the brand ambassador for AIDS Healthcare Foundation in India, the world's oldest and largest non-profit organization for HIV testing and treatment. Currently, he is developing a dream project, an LGBTQ community campus at his royal establishment of Hanumanteshwar for the social and financial empowerment of the LGBT community. Thank you very much, Manvendra, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me over here.
Our next awesome panelist is Sonal Jiani. Sonal Jiani, we'll just wait for her to turn on her camera. So, oh, there you are. Okay, Sonal Giani is an LGBTQIA+ activist and a filmmaker. She's a co-founder of Youth LGBTQI+ initiatives Yaria and Mumbai-based support group Umang, a safe space for lesbians, bisexual women, and trans-masculine persons. She has appeared in numerous talk shows and documentaries and films. Thank you very much, Sonal, for being here. We are so stoked that we have you. You have been I have to admit to this bias, you've been my personal favorite for so long. I can't even, we've known each other for so long. I'm so glad.
Thank you, Deepak. I'm very excited to be having this conversation and for you to be moderating it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Looking forward, yeah.
Thank you very much. Now we have Kalki Subramanian. Kalki, if you're here, could you turn on your camera, please? Okay, I don't think we've got Kalki here at the moment. Right, so I will move on to Anish. Anish Gawande is a curator for the Pink List India. Anish Gawande is a writer and translator. He is the director of Dara Shikoh Fellowship, an interdisciplinary arts residency in Kashmir, and founded and curated of the Pink List India, a queer political advocacy organization. Anish graduated with a degree in comparative literature and society from Columbia University and is currently a Rhodes Scholar pursuing his master's in intellectual history at Oxford, focusing on disinformation and propaganda in the global South. Anish, thank you very much.
Very lovely to have you here. I'm going to show you my face in just a second.
No problem. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. And let's start with our conversation. My first question is, would you like to give us some context? Could each of you introduce your work a little bit more to us and how your work is situated within the LGBTIQ human rights movement in India? How is it situated within the queer human rights movement in India? I'd like to start with Sonal, if that's okay.
Sure, Deepak. So I have co-founded 2 initiatives in India. One, as mentioned in my bio, Umang is a support space for lesbians, bisexual women, and trans-masculine persons. So, I mean, when you look at India, the situation is that there are very few LGBT support groups, and this is one of them. And also the communities are very, very hidden. So the work that this collective basically does is that, one, of course, we mobilize communities and provide them safe spaces. This can be in the form of a physical space like a drop-in center. But outside of that, we also create spaces. So we organize events or socializing or bonding, even online events where people could connect to the community. Other than the community mobilization, we also support people with mental health counseling, free mental health counseling, as well as legal aid in the event of crisis. And outside of that, again, crisis handling as well, because these communities also, we face a lot of like the primary issues that the LBT communities, and when I'm saying T, I mean trans-masculine communities face, is that there is a lot of marriage pressure, and owing to marriage pressure and generally a kind of repressing of women's sexuality, there is a lot of familial violence. So this can range from, like locking people in, like homebounding them without their consent, to even physical or sexual assault. So that is the point where we.
How does this work? And I'm guessing because this work's being done with largely, women and trans-masculine people, a lot of this work has the second layer of discrimination attached to it, right?
Right.
You're queer, and B, you're a female-bodied individual. So
Right.
it gets really, really difficult that when you are working in spaces like that in India.
Right.
Would you like to talk about your experience in that context?
So yes, I'll talk about it. But besides that, I mean, I'll come to it. So I mean, also I independently work as an influencer, especially in the mainstream, where I deal with like kind of the public narrative that's built around the LGBTQ. So you will find me on media panels, you will find me debating this in mainstream spaces. Especially, we have a lot of clamp down from religious bodies. And so, one is, of course, religious bodies, but also like because you are female bodies, there's a kind of, India is a patriarchal society, so there's a kind of policing of women's bodies in any case. And within that, when you have an intersection of sexuality, it gets more complicated. More intersections of caste and class, then, the situation can get even more complex. What I try to do is that I have been working with the religious bodies also and workforces. I'm part of the National Ecumenical Forum on Gender, Sex, Sexuality, where we are engaging with faith to kind of, change the environment and the discussions that are happening currently in the mainstream with respect to sexuality. As far as the women's movement is concerned, you are very accurate when you say that there's kind of a double marginalization that sort of happens, and we find that although the community and this movement has been on for about 30 years, the visibility of I would say the LBT sections, again here I mean transmasculine, we are not on the same level as I would say like the representation of gay men or hijra communities in India. Absolutely. Like one almost feels if we were compelled to make a comparison, we are like 20 years behind. But what we are seeing is that there is a kind of third wave which is coming up. Younger people especially, and the younger collectives which are not registered, we are finding that very much there are people who are coming out even without support structures, and this is a huge change that we are seeing 2018 onwards. Like we just feel like the community has suddenly burst. Like earlier, if you were in Bombay, you sort of went to a party, it would be normal to see like 500 people. But I have, just as a comparison, I'm saying. But now I've been to events where there are 5,000 to 8,000 people, even in a party. So
and it's all down to works of people. It's all down to works of individuals like you. And I'm so glad that I know you not only personally, but also your work. I'm going to ask this question to everyone. So this is not just going to be a question for you. So do you think a lot of us who are working in the queer spaces, and I say us because I still work within the queer spaces in India and in Canada both, that we need to address the current issues around religious minorities and the intersectionality of religious minorities and sexual minorities? For example, Muslim LGBT people, for example, Christian LGBT people, for example, Dalit LGBT people. Do you think that angle needs to come in and we've kind of missed out on that?
Yes, Deepak, I think 100% I agree with you that, I mean, I would say that the next primary focus needs to be, around intersectionality, and intersectionality owing to religion, class, caste as well. Caste is a real issue in India, and we see that creep within the LGBTQ spaces as well, because the community is also composed of the same society, right? So we have
the air we breathe, it's the water we drink.
Exactly. Exactly. So I think like, for a long time, the focus of the community was decriminalization. But if you see in the last couple of years, we are finding that there is newer conversations happening, and it's much needed, especially considering that, currently there's a deep polarization owing to political sentiments within the country and the government which is currently at power. So if you look at the general mainstream narrative, it is very polarity inducing, So which is why we have to be, and it is trickling down within the communities. There is a fracture, there's a fraction. And which is why you will find that intersectionality is a conversation which has appeared. It's much needed, and I think it is happening too late.
Thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. And I think the takeaway is that for me that yes, LGBT people in India have a double marginalization, but it could triple when you consider it from the lens of other kinds of marginalization,
economic privilege, social privilege,
economic, social, religious, caste, and such. We do need to bring out and support more and more Muslim, Christian, and Dalit queer leaders to come up and to also have their say within the conversations. So thank you very much for Sonal for that. We've got Kalki with us. Kalki, hello. Would you be able to turn on your camera for us? Hello,
Yes,
hello.
please. Hello, I apologize for being late because my connection was bad.
No problem. I'm just going to introduce you and I'm going to ask you the question again. And then I'm going to move on to, after that, we have 3 to 4 minutes to answer this question, and then we can move on to with Manav and Anish. So Kalki Subramanian is an Indian transgender activist, artist, poet, actor, and writer. Kalki is the founder of Shahodri Foundation, an organization which works for the social, political, and economic empowerment of transgender people in India. Kalki is one of the most prominent voices of LGBTQI communities in India. She has spoken to over 1 million students across India and is known for her relentless and fierce activism. Thank you very much, Kalki. I really appreciate you being here. Kalki, so the question that we are sort of pondering about right now is, if you could tell us how your work, your personal work is situated within the context of queer human rights movement in India. So for me to understand that, and then we can move on to asking the same question to others.
The queer movement, especially the LGBTQI movement in India, became visible, I would say only after the 90s, especially because of the HIV epidemic. And many NGOs actually started to work for targeted population on sexual health. And one of the major targeted population who needs to be benefited was, of course, the gay community and the transgender community. So it was during the epidemic only that we got visibility. And of course, the trans community has always been invisible since the colonization of the British in this country. And for more than 200 years, obviously. And after the sexual health projects actually took up, and then the sensitization on that started, followed by that, we also began to raise, NGOs also began to raise up for the rights of the community. Right. Human rights issues, homelessness, the right to a better living, dignity, the right to acceptance and all that. That is how it actually started. But it was actually the transgender community of India that, out of all the spectrum of the LGBTQI community, that got somewhat to a certain percentage of acceptance in the Indian society. But still there has to be a lot more to be done. The government is, of course, quite friendly here. The state as well as the central governments are friendly here. That's because we have worked for the past 15 years. We have been intensively working with the policymakers, all the political parties, right and left, right wing and left wing. And we have been working with the media, academicians, and judiciary as well. Fortunately, we've got a lot of allies. We developed a lot of allies in all fields of Irana, whether it's academics, politics, law, when it comes to, of course, administration, the policymakers, the judiciary.
That's wonderful. I think
that really helped us to raise up, stand up, and win some of the milestone victories for the LGBTQI community in India.
Fantastic. So, Kalki, there's always two aspects to human rights, right? One is actually three. That one is the one that you're fighting legally with the government, with the authorities. The second is the one that you're fighting on a day-to-day basis around dignity of acceptance in society. And the third is that you're fighting within the community. Do you see that the LGBTQI community in India is a little bit less? I mean, because we do see a wave of, you know, anti-Muslim wave. We could see sometimes anti-Christian waves and sometimes anti-Dalit waves. Do you think these waves are as big within the queer community in India, or we are a little? Okay.
Obviously, yes, that I see it. Even though within the transgender community, I don't see the caste as a problem. Definitely, I would say religion has been a problem within the LGBTQI community. I would also say that within the LGBT community, not every transgender person is gay friendly. There's a lot of
and vice versa.
Yeah, there's a lot of homophobia within the within the trans community, and there is a lot of transphobia in the gay community as well. For example, it is not acceptable for two trans women to fall in love, live together, have sexual life. That has been like the cultural thing within the transgender community, hijra community here, unacceptable. And if someone finds it, especially your own gurus and gharanas find that you have been in a sexual relationship with another trans woman, you will be punished.
Right. So that actually makes
such
this,
things.
I actually didn't know about that.
Yeah, that's
I had
true.
no idea about that. That means like a lot of the, there is a section of the trans community in India that themselves have very strict gender rules of what you need to do.
Very strict gender rules, and that is what actually pulls me down, because when I cut my hair short, all my friends were like, "Why did you cut your hair? You're a trans woman, you're a woman, and for women, long hair is so important. You look beautiful and all that."
Presentation.
And all these gender roles, like you need to cook, you need to know how to wear a sari, you need to know how to cook meals and all that. So naturally, I'm not that kind of a person. I do what I love. So within the trans community, I do struggle a little bit with my friends because they are very stereotyped. And almost many trans women, even my friends, homophobic. And I've seen a lot of gay community friends transphobic as well. So there is this conflict within, because I think that exists because of the lack of awareness and education within the community.
So there's a fight
on an external level. We all come together. Yeah, we all come together for the Pride Parade, and we all dance and go, and we do all sorts of dancing, celebrating.
It's similar. It's not, might not be the same here, but it's similar in Canada as well.
But when we go back, it's a problem.
Yeah, I'd like to come to Manvendra. If you can turn on your camera, I would ask you the same question. And what do you think, like, if you could talk about your work within the human rights context and the challenges that you're facing in India?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo to what Kalki said, because my activism also began when the HIV/AIDS kind of, I would say HIV and AIDS was a curse, I would say, but it came as a blessing in disguise to organizations like ours and Humsafar and many others who started working in the 1990s and the early 2000s, where we got empowered because the government wanted to support us and fund us. And even as on today's date, my organization, Raksha Trust, 80% of the funding, I would say, or 85% of the funding is coming from the state government and the central government, for the central government for the transgender issues, and the state government for we don't say homosexual or gay population or bisexual population. The word which has been coined is called MSM, men having sex with men, which includes all men who have sex with men, which may include even straight men for that matter. So but my activism began with that, and moving further, after I came out openly as gay, it increased, and then I saw myself as an educator. I have been doing a lot of education programs. I have done 13 TED Talks as of now. And I know you have been part of one TED Talk which we did in Sweden, and I've been invited as faculty by various schools, colleges, universities. So my focus has been more on the education part, educating the youth, as well as talking to them about sexual health issues, because since I'm connected with HIV and AIDS.
It's very interesting for me because you just made me think of one thing. HIV pandemic and epidemic, when that happened, it bolstered human rights over a period of time. And we see with the current pandemic, the current corona pandemic, it seemed to have taken away from a lot of human rights that people have enjoyed earlier. But that's a very interesting thought, and I'm not going to investigate too much into that because that would be digressing from the point of view. So thank you very much for your answer. I'm going to move with the same question to Anish. Anish, what what do you think, how would you sort of situate your work within the human rights context of queer individuals in India? Anish, you're on mute.
There we go, sorry.
No problem.
So Deepa, quite honestly, when I started off, right, I think I did not start off as an activist. I still don't consider myself an activist because everyone on this panel has done so much more than I have. And I think they continue to do so much that inspires me, right? For me, it was a journey that came about quite personally because growing up, I was always interested in politics, but was in the closet and stayed in the closet because I told myself there's no possibility of being gay in Indian politics, right? And so I went abroad to the US to study, and I'd given up all sort of hopes of coming back or getting into politics until right before the election. I got a phone call from Milindera to ask me to be on his campaign team. And so I came back very out and was incredibly surprised by the fact that there was more acceptance within Indian politics for queer rights than I'd previously anticipated. And that's when I started getting involved with a lot of organizations, started doing some work on the ground, and then ended up starting Pink List India, which was mainly geared towards ensuring that there was public pressure that could be applied on politicians so that we were no longer begging for rights, but rather we were demanding rights. Because I think especially in that brief period, right, I came back to India in May 2018. And that was the period when we had no idea that the Supreme Court would actually strike down 377. It had been quite a few years. Everyone had sort of lost hope. There were so many people doing inspiring work, people like Parmesh Shani, who had worked with Parmesh, was doing work in the corporate sector. Others were doing work in education. And everyone was trying to figure out what to do when the court isn't taking heed of your actions, right? And so my path was sort of gearing up towards the political side.
I really like I really like your analogy of like, listen, I'm not begging for it. I'm asking for something that's mine. And I think a lot of the times people forget that rights in general, whether they're human rights or specific property rights and such, what people are saying is not give me something. They're saying get out of my way. I'm not asking you for something. I'm just saying, do not stand in my way. So when I say, give me a right to get married to someone, that doesn't mean pressurize me to marry. It just means do not stand in my way if I want to get married, if I do choose to get married. Have I understood you correctly?
Absolutely. Because fundamental rights are not given. They are merely assured or ensured.
Very good. Very good. Excellent. So now that homosexuality has been decriminalized for several years in India, what are the key human rights issues holding the queer community that you work with or connected with? So what are those key human rights issues that the community is still struggling with?
I think, just to reiterate that the fact that Sonal brought up earlier as well, I think until 377, everyone had a sort of umbrella to walk under and to sort of fight for, right? I think after we've crossed that hill, we've reached a point where there are several challenges before us. And I think everyone tackles different challenges. I think for me, the two crucial challenges that remain are one, a concrete legislation banning conversion therapy. I think over the course of the pandemic, we've seen that come up time and again. We know that it's currently illegal in sort of terms of Supreme Court judgments and other forms of legislation, but there's no enforceable law that allows somebody to actually go to someone practicing conversion therapy and prevent them from practicing it. And that's been a crucial concern, not just in India, but globally. So the Global Equality Caucus, which is based
even in
absolutely,
Canada, yeah,
absolutely. So the Global Equality Caucus, which is based in the UK, has been taking this up as, and they work with politicians across the world as a key sort of component of demands for rights. I think the second thing in India, which is very important, is that we need to have sexuality and gender identity included in anti-discrimination policies. And I think this needs to happen at the level of the government and not just at the level of companies, which are doing this. And it's a great move that they are, because it ensures that every single individual, regardless of whether they are in the private sector, which comprises only 14% of the country's sort of workforce, gets access to anti-discrimination policies that are enjoyed by other communities. So I think those are the two key things, but we have to be allied in our fight against Islamophobia, against casteism, and a variety of ills that plague society as a whole. And I think there's alliances that need to be built ASAP.
And, you know, as you say that, it just makes me see the obvious and point out the obvious. Other than Karim, who is joining us from Toronto, we have very few Muslim voices from India talking with us. We're essentially just talking about them at the moment. You know, they're not being able to talk about, and it's very interesting that I don't think we've done enough. Or let me just put it in a more positive way. I think we do need to do more to bring out queer, Muslim, Christian, and Dalit leadership to the forefront. And I mean queer first, but equally with their second identities to be brought out first so that they can see that they are represented. And I hate to use even the word they, so that our queer brothers and sisters from all kinds of religious and community backgrounds and caste backgrounds can see that they are being represented, and it's not just English-speaking elites, upper caste people like myself are the ones who are speaking for them. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely, Deepak, but I would caution here, right? I think just going back to demands for rights rather than begging for rights, the first sort of demand for queer rights was put forth by Namdev Dhasal, a Dalit Panther in Bombay, when he led a march of trans sex workers and other sex workers from Kamatipura for ration cards, right? When they were not permitted in the late 80s. Even today, I think there are Dalit queer people at the forefront doing incredible work. I think the person I've admired for a long time is Disha Pinky Sheikh. She's the first trans spokesperson for a political party in Maharashtra. She's part of the Vanchit Bahujan Aghadi and is a Dalit trans woman who does impeccable work at the grassroots level where, you know, quite honestly, as someone like me, who is also upper caste, upper class, born and brought up in Bombay, could never imagine doing. And the impact that she has is immense. And I think there are a lot of these voices that exist who are doing incredible
work. Like Salim Kidwai. When Salim Kidwai's passing away was ending of an era in itself. He wrote the famous book with Ruth Vanita around, you know, same-sex love in India. And I think that was a seminal piece of work that sort of changed a lot of people's lives. But of course, it didn't, because it was largely written in English, it was largely written in, and it was subsequently translated. But still, I was personally saddened, and I'd never met him. I was personally saddened when he passed away. So thank you very much for pointing that out and reminding me, why do we have these panel discussions in the first place? Anish, thank you very much. I'm going to come to Sonal back to Sonal with this question around, with the same question that, you know, now that the homosexuality has been decriminalized for several years, what are the still pertinent human rights issues that are facing the community, within the community, outside the community, with the authorities? What are the major human rights issues that you think are facing us?
I think the primary concerns have been covered by Anish, but I think adding to that, I would say that we don't still have basic constitutional rights. I would say that things like, you know, marriage is still not equal for the community. We don't have marriage rights, and we don't have rights attached to then marriage rights. For example, we don't have the right to adoption. We don't have the right to property. And generally, the area around right to property is a very gray space. So not having a legal protection is obviously affecting communities. For, I think, specifically specific to LBT and also generally, but definitely for LBT, I think like familial violence is very, very high. And there isn't enough protection, especially when the violence is coming from the family, you know. For us, like we have cases on a daily basis where not daily, I would say, but very frequent basis where we have families which are the main pressure points. And even if we kind of had a legal protection, handling familial violence and natal violence is much more difficult, right? Beyond that, beyond these, of course, conversion therapy, but in general, we don't have an anti-discriminatory law. While, you know, the government has kind of asked for provisions for, you know, work and protection to happen within the state and central government spaces. But when it comes to private industries, still there isn't enough protection. We find that when it comes to workforces, right, there is a lot of work happening, but it's mainly one is finding it that restricted to MNCs. If you look at small scale workspaces, and which are in the thousands, by the way, in India. It's not
people don't recognize that 80% of India's economy is unorganized.
And I think overall, when you look at freedom of expression, right, which is supposed to be such a basic human right, I'm finding that as the community is sort of growing, there is a kind of resistance we are finding to newer identities. And for example, the non-binary community is not. I feel like the non-binary communities are not so well connected with grassroots communities till now. Being non-binary is something that would not be, kind of accepted in kind of rural communities, So for example, I'm part of many pride groups and city groups, and it's very common to hear cases of a person who were male-bodied but feminine in expression, who has been beaten up by local queer groups for being non-binary, sporting a beard with a a sari, and people are not comfortable with it. So one feels like that, of course, sure. Overall at an India level, work has to happen, but within our community spaces as well, we have to look at sensitizing within spaces as well, and opening it up to these newer identities and talking about things that Ani spoke of, right? Like the intersection that is happening around class and caste. Even right now, it's very difficult to have these conversations in the pride spaces, But having said that, I will also say that it's very, I think, it's nice to see that the new generation is very much empowered. They are questioning these spaces, and not only are they questioning, but they are taking ownership of the spaces and taking ownership of the work that has to be done. That's where we are sort of at.
That's amazing. Yeah, I've had the similar kind of experience.
And
actually.
I think one more point is the trans rights situation, right? We had a protection of the trans rights, the bill passed, but this is not really friendly to trans persons. When the bill itself was formulated and tabled, they did not take feedback from the trans communities. So the bill is quite regressive in some sense. And this is something we are finding.
Anish just mentioned that. That. I think you can talk about that more. Yeah, go on.
So I'm saying time and again, what we're finding is that when there are laws being made about the community, even though there are so many prominent groups, the voices are not sort of being heard. And I think that especially when it comes to political lobbying, enough is not happening. And that's where the work of Anish is so important, for us.
Absolutely. I fully plan on joining political parties when I'm back. I'll be back in a year or so. But when I'm back, I'm fully plan on doing that stuff as well. So Anish, maybe I'll be coming to you for advice. Right, I'm going to move on to Manvendra to talk about the same thing. Manvendra, what do you think are the major issues that are facing the queer community in the context of human rights in the country at the moment?
See, as my experience as an educator, and I've been attached to so many colleges and universities, one thing which is lacking is that our education system, really needs to be changed. Even the fact that now it's been 3 years that the Supreme Court judgment has come, still there are so many education institutions which are absolutely not aware of the case and this verdict. So this dissemination of this judgment very badly needs to be reached out to the education institution, because as we all know, LGBT rights are nothing else but human rights. So at least on the basis of human rights, this thing needs to reach out to the students. Just an hour back, I was with a student group doing a Zoom meeting, and they were clueless about Section 377. So, we are there as activists who are, doing on our best to see that we educate the students, the youth, but that's not enough. We need the education system to change and to at least include what has happened in the past, which is what India has done. And the Supreme Court was a landmark judgment, which I mean, a lot of people outside of India know more about the people in India, you know. So it's unfortunate that we Indians are only not aware of our constitution and our the issues. So that's one thing, and I completely agree to what Anish and Sonal has also said. And we definitely need voices. We definitely, because many things are happening in the country without taking into consideration the community. So if there are voices, if there are representatives are there, you know, from the community, then we will be able to give justice to a lot of our issues with regards to legislation and laws in the country.
Thank you very much for that. So I'm not going to let you go right just yet. Come back. I'm going to, you're still on mute. So I have this one last question to you, and I'm going to go to everyone else with this question as well before I wrap up for today. How do you see Indian queer movements connecting with the broader LGBT community at the global level? How can we build solidarity across oceans and borders? Like, how can we do that? What is that Indian rights activists need to do, and what does the world need to do to have those bridges being built with India?
See, I think one thing I am very proud of being part of this LGBTQI community, that we, even though we may be a sexual minority community, but we are much better networked than the non-LGBTQI community, you know. So I think we should use that privilege and that opportunity to network with other parts of the world as well, you know, not just within our geographical areas, but globally. Because now we have all the means. When I was growing up, we didn't have any communication, or we didn't even have a mobile phone. We had landline. You know, now at least you all are born with cell phones and internet and social media, and so many opportunities are there. Then we can definitely make use of that and connect with the world. That's one of the best things we can do. If we just network, you know, with other people, I'm sure we will be able to get a lot of support from, and not just with the community, as Sonal and many others have also said, we need to build allies. Allies play, according to me, allies play a very important role, because I believe that only it is through allies that we will be able to mainstream our issues in the society. So we are building up networks with communities, we also need to network with allies globally, and get their involvement and you know, help us make change in our society.
Thank you so much for that. Kalki, I would like to come to you with the same question. What do you think are the concrete ways in which the Indian queer community can liaison with the international queer community and build those bridges? We need those allyships, don't we?
Obviously, yes. I think the Indian queer community should be able to understand first of all, understand the international human rights. How does it work? And what does it mean and all that? Beyond that, I think we need to be well aware of the political atmosphere in all continents, which I think is an essential thing for every activist. Is not just the LGBTQI movement, but you need to monitor and understand political movement as well. But I also think that education plays a very huge role. And in all countries, whether it is the West or the East or Asian countries, of course, patriarchy and is a major problem. Religion is a major problem. And we all go through all sorts of oppression because of patriarchy, or because of religious oppression, racism, color, gender, and all that. Basically, the problems that we face are almost similar, whether if you're living in the US or in India or in Africa. It's because of ignorance, basically. It's because of lack of education and ignorance on sex and gender education. So we all need to ensure one thing for sure, that our next generation, the young ones, the children of tomorrow, the children of today and tomorrow, are enlightened, empowered with the knowledge, the right knowledge on sex and gender equality, the knowledge on education on sex and gender equality, and that is how I believe we can make the world perfect. That's how I believe we can make the world an equal place for everyone, cisgender, transgender, LGBTQI+, queer persons and everything. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that answer. Anish, I'm going to come to you and I want to talk to you about this. So, growing up in India, one would always hear this. If you need to be good to your neighbors, you need to invite them home. One of the ways to have allies is to have food with them, is to invite them to your home, is to basically be engaged with them in a more meaningful way. And I think I find that to have international allies and international liaisons, just invite each other, invite them to come and speak at your events, you go and speak at their events, help each other with money if you can, help each other with, but what are the other things that we can do so that we can connect our movements with the broader global movements around human rights?
So I want to bring up two things, right, Deepak? I think one is that India has already started having an outsized impact on queer movements around the world. So in many places that I've been to, many places I've spoken at, the 377 judgment has been used as a sort of landmark judgment in the Caribbean Court of Human Rights and other Commonwealth countries to sort of persuade courts to take action. So I think in that sphere, there's already a lot of networking, connections, conversations that's happening. I think the second thing is, over the course of the pandemic, it's been incredible to see the level of sort of international solidarity and support. So many of us here have run fundraisers, have sort of worked with queer communities across the country, and have received donations from, people who've never been to India, who may have heard of sort of the Indian queer community for the first time through social media, through other networks. And that's really created some lasting bonds that I think will play out in the years to come. But I do think what's also important is that while we sort of see this positive act of collaborating with people around the world, it's also important to learn from movements that are more mature, right? I think, harking also again back to what Sonal said at the beginning, what we're seeing in the Indian LGBTQ community is significant ruptures and differences of opinion, right? Across political lines, across ideological lines. And I think those are healthy. I think I have been involved in my fair share of controversy in many ways. And it's been good to also be engaged in debate and discussion while acknowledging that even if you disagree with somebody, that doesn't mean you hate them. It doesn't mean you sort of are not going to speak to them, but that you will stick to your values and they will stick to theirs and have those debates, right? And I think particularly in the aftermath of the protests that we saw against the CAA, in the aftermath of a lot of other political churnings that have been happening, we've seen a divergence of opinion. Should the LGBT community ally itself with movements against the government? Is that the only way to demand for rights? And some activists have done that and managed to secure rights in some parts of the country. Others have recognized that it's more dangerous for queer people to stand up against the state at a time when we're already vulnerable. And they've taken a decision not to do that and sort of act more subversively. And I think these are the conversations that are happening in other parts of the world as well. And learning from those is very useful, particularly at a time when we're seeing incredible political turmoil. We also have to remember the queer community in India is incredibly sort of vulnerable and also has made gains that are very recent. I think the biggest learning for me is how countries like Poland, countries like Hungary, which 15 years ago were considered sort of great places for LGBTQ plus rights. They had progressive laws being passed. They had a steadily growing LGBTQ plus movement. In 15 years, that situation has changed completely. And so I think it's important for us to not take our rights for granted and learn from those other places to see how we can effectively resist.
And I really love your point, because I think the pandemic has really, and of course, I mean, I've lost a lot of family members to the pandemic, but one thing that I do see during the pandemic, people have become more and more amenable to the idea of doing important things online. I mean, we would not have imagined doing a panel like this before the pandemic. We would have, asked everyone to come to Canada. We would have done that and things like that. So while there are cuts being made to almost every human rights organization that I know of, there are also people coming up with newer and more innovative ways of being in touch with each other. But my question to you again would be a new one. Since 2014, I think it's undeniable, whichever scale that you look at, whichever place that you look at, and it's not like other governments haven't done this. I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm anti a particular government. But yes, since 2014, we have slipped on almost all international indices of human rights. We are no longer, we are like apparently a hybrid democracy now. We are this, that, and the other, which sure, we can quibble about the, what we can quibble about the names, but what gives each of us hope right now, especially in the work that we're doing? What gives us hope for our country that this situation will improve? Because it's undeniable that the situation has deteriorated, and probably not for me, not for you, and not for people on this panel, but the lived experiences of queer people, the lived experiences of queer Dalit people, queer Dalit Muslim people. It's undeniable. What gives you hope, Anish?
So, I mean, as you know, Deepak, I wear my political convictions on my sleeve, and I stand completely against the government of the day and have been, right? I think what gives me hope is that despite this, we do remain a space. I mean, I have vociferous differences with the government in power, yet there are times when I work with them, right? I think there's times when you recognize that you're ideologically opposed, you recognize that you will never agree with the other side, yet you work together on certain fundamental principles. And I think the fact that there is an iota of humanity left in certain sections gives me hope. And I think the fact that there are so many others in such worse positions who continue to struggle tirelessly. And I want to also just caution against this sort of characterization since 2014, because I think despite my political convictions, there remains, I mean, homophobia and transphobia in governments and political parties of all hues, right? I've worked with multiple political parties from the left to the right at the grassroots level, and I don't think that there is a massive difference in most of them. And I think, again, it goes back to the same question of, at every level, against any government, the queer movement will always have to fight for its rights. And this government is no different. The previous governments were no different. And in each of them, I think those before us, so many of them on this panel, have fought and persevered and seen victory despite so many losses. And seeing them is honestly inspirational. And I think it gives hope and more joy than I could possibly ask for.
Thank you, Anish. Sonal, what gives you hope? Sonal?
No, I think I'm very hopeful. I mean, I am hopeful because previous governments have also been homophobic, very deeply homophobic, and we have seen a change in position of previous governments as well. And the work that we are doing in grassroots is indicating that even the current government is open to dialogue. So I mean, I'm hopeful because of those reasons. But beyond that, I think that what Manav and Anish and Kalki also spoke of, they spoke about the power in networking. I feel like the networks currently around India are very, very strong. That also makes me very hopeful. I mean, I get notified on a daily basis of human rights situations or crisis situations happening to community members across the country, and within a few hours we are able to reach people in the remotest of places. When we have been notified, and so this kind of like differences aside, attitude when like there is a crisis situation, people work together. And I mean, a long time back, like when the Section 377 verdict was happening, an activist, I remember being very, I think disturbed because I had noticed fractures at that time, 2011, 2012. And I was telling him, like an older activist, that, why is it like this? Like, why can't the community work together? And, that's when she sort of pointed out that maybe it is good as long as we are all walking towards the same goal, even if we take different routes, it's all right. And I think that there's a lot of power in that we all work in our respective spaces. I'm also finding that, now like earlier, there was this space where people would not talk about polarization, and now people do. And because we are talking about it, there is conversations around how do we manage polarization as well. And I think young people coming into the movement, emerging identities, coming up, them taking ownership of the movement, showing us new possibilities. I think those are things that sort of make
Give
me
you
very
hope.
I don't have any room for like negativity in my
That's brilliant. Thank you. I think
I-
I'm going to need a part of that room too. Thank you very much, Sonal. Kalki, what gives you hope? If you could briefly tell us what gives you hope.
Well, I think that we have come a long way in a short period of time, especially in the last 11 years in India. We have seen some of the milestone victories, whether it is the decriminalization of same-sex relationship, that is homosexuality, or the recognition of transgender rights in 2014 by the Supreme Court of India, the Right to Privacy Act, and also the recently not so good Transgender Protection Act passed in the Parliament. I think that these are signs of better times. And even though we do face a lot of doubts and fears on the future, I would say we have come this far, and we will definitely go so far and achieve that equal spaces, equal opportunities, and respect that our community deserves, LGBTQI community deserves. I think from a transgender perspective, I would say that there are a lot of role models right now in the country among the trans community. A lot of them are coming out, and many are, I mean, we have so many police officers in Tamil Nadu from the transgender community, and lawyers and doctors and professors and businessmen, persons and entrepreneurs, and even in politics. So these are the hopes that I have, not only for a trans community, but also for the entire LGBT community. We do have a lot of issues. We do have a lot of problems within the community as well. We fight outside the community as well. We have so many problems, of course, but it was all before that. Also, it was existing, and now too, it is existing. But what gives me hope is that change is irreversible. We have seen that, and we will definitely see change, positive change, and we will work on that.
Thank you very much, Kalki. I really, really appreciate all of you being here. Thank you once again for everyone attending. Thank you to our wonderful speakers, Anish, Kalki, Manvendra, and Sonal. Thank you to our presenting organizations, Dignity Network Canada, Fierté Canada Pride, ASAAP, Pride Winnipeg, and of course, our wonderful sponsors, CUPE National. So I would like to hand it over back to Barry and Pranay for closing remarks, and then we'll say bye to everyone.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Deepak. And thank you on behalf of Pride Winnipeg. Thank you everyone for attending today. This has been a great discussion. I look forward to actually watching it again this evening. So this evening at 5 o'clock Central Time here in Winnipeg, we'll be airing it through our live YouTube account for Pride Week, and it'll actually be up for the remainder of the year, actually, for individuals to watch. So thank you very much again on behalf of Pride Winnipeg, and I wish you all a happy Pride Week here in Winnipeg. I wish you all happiness across the world.
If everyone can turn on their cameras for once so that we can take a nice little picture. Barry, we're waiting for you. If you can turn on your camera. There you go. Okay. Anish, are you going to be able to do that? Oh, there you are. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Smiles. Got it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
so much,
Deepak.
Barry.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
So much, everyone.